Hi, I'm Matt Craze. I'm going to do a presentation on the US seafood industry, and the title is The US Seafood Consumer is Confused. We came up with this title after having done months of research, both through a quant survey, where we interviewed about 1,500 consumers around the country, and also we conducted dozens of interviews with people, in-depth interviews, to really get a sense of where they're at, their headspace is at with seafood and what they're thinking. And I conducted this study with my partner, George Crocker, who is actually present in the room. This is George. So if you have any questions afterwards about our study, please, George is equally able to talk about our study, if not better. One of the exercises that we did in this research, and by the way, this is part of a report that's going to be available in coming weeks. We got people to make mental maps, and what we got them to do was go on Google and just bring up a bunch of images on what they thought about salmon or shrimp or tilapia and other seafood. And what we often found was people made collages that looked a little bit like this with salmon. And there's a mixture, and I like this one in particular because the lady who made it made a division and divided both positive and negative imagery. This lady's called Catherine. She's a 32-year-old, lives in Washington, D.C. So you see a lot of things that we see when we talk about salmon, snowy mountains, totem poles, sushi's a big one, and on the other side, she documented lice, pollution, and slave labor. And if I click, I should get the, oh no, hold on. There you go. And she said, she actually told us that the confusion and the lack of, I know it's hard to read at the back because I've been there, but she said, seafood's one of those things where I don't know enough, salmon, and I want more transparency. I frequently find purchasing salmon and seafood to be confusing, so I go with other protein. Shrimp. This is a lady who is in her 40s in Alabama, and she grew up with, it's a state with a shrimp industry. She talked to us about bubblegum, and she has, on the one hand, this positive imagery around beaches, vacations, spices, and at the same time, there's this other negative stuff, stormtroopers, which must be factory farming. And quote, yeah, shrimp has been part of my life since early childhood, Rebecca, and she talked about bubblegum, and she also talked about some of this negative stuff, both in farmed and wild caught, and often mixing that up, which I think is quite relevant. So when we pull together all of these different thoughts, what we find in these detailed interviews are these contrasting messages. And the things that come up the most are, oops, it's gone. Can I go backwards? Yeah. Nutrition and health, unsurprising. Romantic notions of fishing. People find seafood upscale and classy. And often people are making seafood on special occasions. In the quant survey, the 1,500 respondents, people most often talk about Sunday as the day when they cook seafood, followed by Friday and Saturday, and then much less on the weekdays. And then, of course, we hear about unknown provenance and lack of transparency. I know I can read it here as well. Overfishing and what farm fish may be fed. And most people mention, a lot of people mention seaspiracy. And that's just how it is. Let's go to the next one. So consumers are confused and unaware. And in our results, what we find is that people, there's an awful lot of people who don't know if they're buying farmed or wild, for example. And that actually, what I draw your attention to in particular is the fact that as you go through the generations, because we've broken this up both by generation, ethnicity, and there's a number of different ways that we slice it, and in our full report, you'll see a lot of that sort of 360 view. But the younger generations are even less aware of where things are coming from, and also where things are coming from and what they're actually eating. It's quite a remarkably high number. There you go. So let's take just a step back and remind ourselves of what happened during the COVID period. Now, I'm obviously not from the US, I'm British, and I have a working theory that in Europe, people eat more seafood at home. It's more of a weekday meal. It's actually the Norwegian salmon industry is counter-cyclical in a sense, because when people have less money in their pocket, they'll go out less to a restaurant, they'll cook a nice bit of salmon at home. And what happened in America, sorry, I was going to say this country, is that people started to cook more from home, and it started to get a little bit more like Europe. And it was actually the younger generations that were driving that trend. And I was quite surprised at the numbers that came out of our study showing this. The refrigerated and frozen categories perform better than other land-based proteins. This is a 4-year CAGR rate, which goes up to May 2023, based on Circana data. And this graph shows how younger people were really driving this trend. Now, the data on the left-hand side is claimed frequency, which, as George is often pointing out, is not necessarily how much people really consume. We look at things two different ways. There's also last counted, so how long ago did you actually eat? And then you can sort of triangulate those numbers. But here we're using the stated frequency. And also we asked people, how much more seafood are you eating post-COVID? And we found bigger numbers in the younger groups. And one question that we asked people here was, how you learn how to cook seafood, because people have been doing this in COVID in large numbers. And it's really, for me, it's no coincidence that the younger generations are learning how to cook things using different tools to my generation. I'm a typical Gen X guy. I love cookbooks. One of the coolest things I've ever seen, I went to meet the chef, Eric Ripert, in New York City. And when I went to his office, he has an amazing 3-panel office just full of cookbooks. And I thought that was really cool. But younger people are not doing that. And actually, I have to say, even as a die-hard cookbook guy, I find the online stuff just way easier to actually follow recipes. And so I pointed out here, there's a lady called Tanaka Younger. She is a big influencer on TikTok, very popular. And actually, in our organization, in Spheric Research, we actually have all 4 generation groups working in the company. And Oriana Aguillon is one of my colleagues, and she's a younger millennial. And she was explaining, because I asked her to find a typical influencer for this slide. And she talked about Tanaka, and I hope this is going to work, but I'm going to play a WhatsApp message, because she can actually explain this lady far better than I can. So here goes.
Hey, about the TikTok influencer that I sent you, she became viral on TikTok because she started to make these videos about making dinner for her boyfriend. Actually, the videos are titled that way, Making Dinner for My Boyfriend. And she's just 21 years old, and she was already studying cooking and stuff. I mean, very passionate about cooking and stuff. And in the videos titled Making Dinner for My Boyfriend, she suddenly came up with great and amazing recipes, great seasoning, like cooking from mac and cheese to filet mignon and stuff like that. And people really like that because she looks so young, so skinny, so delicate, and all of a sudden she came up with amazing recipes in her cooking from home, even making the bread. She was going to use
Bread.
for the sandwiches herself from scratch. And those videos, like making dinner for my boyfriend, were basically what made her famous on TikTok. That's what I learned. And actually, that's how I found her on social media, thanks to those videos, making dinner to my boyfriend.
So people like Tanaka are the people who've been helping younger people figure out how to cook things like salmon at home. And also, I would say as well that Gen Zs, if they're not learning it from online stuff like on TikTok, they're actually learning as well a lot from older people at home, but it's visible. So it's kind of easier to cook when it's visible learning, visual cues instead of reading recipes. So the point is the younger groups are very important. But the younger groups also have more angst about seafood than any other generation. And I don't think these numbers are going to be that surprising to the people in this room. But what we see is that incrementally, you go through millennial, you go through Gen Z, and there's more angst in both animal welfare concerns, overfishing, and farm fish are being fed. Press the right button. What was a bit more surprising was this one. I was quite surprised with this data. We asked people how seafood stacks up against chicken and beef. And I didn't put the beef numbers on this slide because really it's not that surprising that most people would say, yeah, seafood's better than beef, right, in terms of its carbon footprint and environmental performance. But the chicken one was kind of interesting. And that's why we chose the chicken numbers here, because older generations and millennials agree in the majority that with the statement, environmentally, I believe seafood is better than chicken. But what was surprising is that in the Gen Z category, there were more disagrees with that statement than agrees. And when I saw that statistic, I was quite blown away with it. Also, the younger generations think that local caught equates to environmentally friendly. And again, if you look at the older generations, younger generations, there are more younger people that believe in that statement. So clearly, some of these messages that the aquaculture industry aspires to in terms of, something that's caught on a farm in southern salmon caught on a farm in southern Chile, or mussels that's frozen on site, has a super good low carbon footprint, that message is not really getting through. So the key question really is, how does this industry retain and grow its base of younger consumers, in my mind? And unsurprisingly, right now, what we're seeing is this trend of frugalization. So you have, which is very specific to the US. The seafood consumption boom was obviously, in a way, it was really supercharged by the stimulus payments that were, and because we saw in the numbers that both younger people were driving the increased seafood consumption, but also lower income groups, and people also in inland states as well. So you had this really amazing kind of, even though the food service segment was shut down, you had this amazing kind of trend where people who've never really eaten premium seafood products before, like lobster tails and crab and nice salmon, all of a sudden they're trying this stuff and they're cooking it at home. Right now, the seafood industry is losing those people, and it's because of inflation. And I think that one of the key questions here is how, obviously there's not much people in this room can do about the economy and what's happening, how much disposable income people have, but they can certainly look at the other things that can be done. The messaging around aquaculture. And I think that some of the insights that we put together may give a few more insights into how some of these segments can be approached. I'd also point out as well that on the first slide, we talked about provenance. And it was I recall when Cargill first got into the seafood industry a few years ago, and I think it was Tim Noonan of Cargill who gave a speech in Norway and talked about this quite an original presentation, and talked about most Americans don't know what they're eating, and the whole provenance issue. And I think that now, but both myself and George have been working on a consultancy study which involves the changes with the FMSA, the traceability rules. And this is going to be quite a big deal for some of the companies in this sector, because obviously most seafood's coming from outside of the United States, and sometimes the visibility of the providers is not that clear. So that's going to be a painful process in the next two or three years, but it might also be a tremendous opportunity for these seafood companies to do that work, but also to maybe tell a different story and craft a different narrative and turn what is a disadvantage right now into an advantage. And there you go. I'm going to put my sales hat on now, and we're doing a report that's called Seafood Through the Consumer's Eyes. You've just seen some excerpts of this data. In the coming weeks, we're going to be talking about this comprehensive report. And if you do want to scan the QR code, what you'll get is my slides. That's not, I think that the GSA will give you that anyway, but we'll also give you some information about early bird rates on that. And that's the end of my sales pitch. And thank you very much for listening to me. I hope that was useful.